welcome back to the Culture Cave. I'm here with Emmett, and we're going to be talking Star Trek Discovery, Season 3, Episode 12. Before you do that, could you please hit a like? Could you please subscribe to the channel if you haven't already? Because we do this every single week. Now, we've only got one more episode of Star Trek left, but we'll be doing The Expanse, as well as much more exciting projects coming up. Also, the channel has a load of other stuff. Go and check it out. Well, Emmett, how are you doing today?
Well, thank you for welcoming me into the cave now that the rebranding has happened, which is great. And I'm doing good. Interesting week of sci-fi. This week we had obviously Discovery and Expanse, but not just that. For fans of Doctor Who, we had a new episode of, the 13th Doctor, which I enjoyed as well. But
I think some of the listeners probably do watch Doctor Who. And as I said to you, Emmett, last week, is that my Doctor Who experience is one episode.
Yes.
The first ever, second ever Matt Smith episode.
Yes.
And that was with the Space Whale.
Yes.
And I'm a big fan of whales and orcas. Orcas are my favorite animal. And I just couldn't watch another one because that was such a beautiful episode. There's no way they could top it.
Oh, you peaked in your Doctor Who journey very quickly, and you're like,
very quickly.
It's all downhill from here. I'm a big Whovian nerd, as I imagine a lot of people probably guessed from looking at me.
Is that what you say? Whovian?
Whovian, yes. It's apparently in the dictionary.
Is that a collective term for Doctor Who fans as well as Doctor Zeus fans?
Whovians, just possibly at this. I think there's probably a good Venn diagram overlap there, that you could probably find. I
would say. Right, let's get into Star Trek. So Star Trek, this episode was called "There Is a Tide." ... Now I'm just going to cut straight to the chase here because we've got probably a fair bit to talk about in terms of Osiris in this episode. So we'll focus on that first of all, and then move into a couple of other points after that. So Osiris, to me, in my mind, they're very much trying to do a Thanos thing with her.
Yeah.
They're trying to say, she did a load of bad stuff, but her motive was true.
Yeah.
So I thought this sort of like weird turn of this character was strange. Give me your thoughts on it before we pick apart each bit of it.
It does feel a little bit backfilly in the sense of they're using this episode to be this character is much deeper than you expected. There's a lot more going on here behind the scenes. And I'm like, well, again, you had 10 or so episodes before this that you could have maybe shown Osiris a little bit more and maybe added this in a little bit more naturally. Again, this episode definitely did leave me feeling that I wish we had seen more of Osiris and more of this side of Osiris earlier in the season, because prior she had just been a very sort of generic sort of gang boss leader for the most part.
But even not just Osiris, even the Emerald Chain, the idea of them having a congress or whatever they said, and science institutes, it was literally just put across these were warlords who were taking over planets and just holding people slaves. It didn't really ever really, maybe it did, but we just missed a tiny detail.
Yeah.
But it wasn't really focused on the fact that they are actually a society.
Yeah. Again, it felt like they were more like a criminal organization that had just sort of expanded over multiple planets. But again, it's a shame that they didn't focus on it. I'm glad that we're getting at least a little bit more depth to the character. I think this episode, made her at least a little bit more engaging than previous episodes had. So I was happy.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think if they didn't have this episode, it would have been a very very mediocre big bad guy for the season. If they didn't have this episode, but fleshing it out a little bit, sort of coming to the Admiral, Charles Vance, with a deal, basically saying we want peace, we want to join with the Federation, and then where it all fell apart. Whereas I was interested to see that Admiral Vance actually was open to it to a certain extent, because he probably saw it as a way to expand the Federation in a really good way, as well as getting rid of the slavery, getting rid of Osiris possibly. But it all fell down because Osiris wasn't willing to face trial for the things that she has done.
It's one of those things of Osiris. I think on some level she believes that she is in it for her people, but ultimately when you boil it down, she is sort of self-motivated in a lot of ways. So the idea that she would bring in this golden age, but she would not get to partake in it, would not get to sample of the fruits, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
Wouldn't sit right with her, and I think it was a shame. I would have liked to see her maybe consider it for a bit more, and then obviously later on, then we had her shooting Rin and killing Rin. I'm like, despite the fact that she didn't need to, and I'm like, oh well, this is sort of like going
Yeah.
against what we've had in the rest of the episode. This sort of like there might be more to Osiris than just a gang leader, where it's like
Yeah.
but maybe it's more the show showing that like she can talk a good game, but ultimately when you boil her down, like behind her justifications, behind her flowery words, there is just like a kind of a terrible person underneath it all,
Yeah, I think so. I think so.
Yeah.
Like she wants her cake and eat it too. I think, and I think that I don't believe that one. Even though they had the robot there saying, like the projection guy saying that she was telling the truth, I believe she was telling the truth. But I think that her nature and what she's done to get there would have come out after the joint had happened. If they had joined the Emerald Chain and the Federation together, she would have eventually been the same tyrant as she was before, 100%.
Yeah. Honestly, what I would have found very interesting, and it would have been a very very risky move to play. But I would kind of have liked it if the season had ended with, the crew of the Discovery take back the ship and all that, and they like bust into like the room, and the Admiral's like, "You can't shoot her," and it's like, "What?" It's like, "We've signed an agreement. The Federation and the Emerald Chain have now joined together," and like the next season is like dealing with the ramifications of that. I think that could have been a very interesting.
That would have been very, very interesting. Yeah, but that's not how they've chosen to do it. They're actually choosing to end it by going to save all those people that are down in the nebula who are getting doused with radiation as we speak. No mention of them. Well, not mention, but no sight of them in this episode.
I think
it's quite interesting the way they've done that. Actually, to be honest,
I think it was definitely like meant as like a tension building thing where like like if we kept cutting back to them on the planet and we were seeing that they were doing okay, it would have interrupted the flow of things, and it would have reduced the tension probably. But because we don't see them and we don't know what's happening, we're going into the next episode with the same level of knowledge as the characters. So it's like we don't know, anything could have happened in the time that they were gone. We could have lost anybody.
Yeah, exactly, and I do understand it by that perspective, because this whole episode there was a little bit in the back of head thinking they've only got so much time. I think they also did, like, moving on then to Tilly. I think they did a lot of work in this episode to sort of give us some belief in Tilly again, because after her first like 12-15 minutes of being a captain before, it didn't really go very well. But this episode, she's really like sort of bucked up. She's like standing up straight. She's saying, "No, you do that, you do that, you do that." It seems like she's trying to really fill the role of captain a bit more now.
Yeah, well, obviously it's a sort of small redemption arc thing for her, where it's like the ship gets captured, but then obviously she's helping to lead the fight back against the invaders and stuff like that. But there's been a couple of nice moments even for like the lesser focused on members of the crew. Detmer and such getting to get involved in the action. Your two fellas that I always forget the name of doing the Morse code to trick the two guys into getting closer, and then everyone doing the
that was pretty cool. He said with Morse code he was just saying just keep tapping.
Just keep tapping.
Yeah, I thought in general I liked the sort of the parallel, or like the sort of the contrast of Osiris and the Admiral sitting at a table having a discussion whilst all this sort of siege is reverse siege, I suppose, taking back the ship is happening
Breakout?
On the breakout is happening on the ship. Like, it was a real contrast of tension, a contrast of the sort of speed of the episode. I think that was pretty good. I wouldn't go as far to say that this is one of my favorite episodes of the season. I think my favorite episode was probably the last one, if I'm honest with you. I liked when they went down into the projection and the holograms and into the nebula. I really liked that, and seeing Saru as a human, even though that's a real trope of Star Trek, I really liked it. Yeah. This episode, where does this rank for you? This one, we'll touch on a few more things, but just generally now, where does it rank?
Yeah, I thought it was a good episode in the sense of like there was a lot of tension to it. There was a lot of interesting little character moments, especially from Osiris. Again, like I said, wish we had got more of it during the season rather than just all being front loaded into this
Yeah.
episode. But you know what can you do? Obviously, with any sort of multi-part story, I'd like to get all the parts of the part one, part two, part three before I give like overall
Yeah.
thoughts on it because so much can change by the conclusion that can really affect your opinion of the preceding episodes.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
like.
I was gonna say, and that's really strange, just because the next episode sort of feels like it's gonna be like the third part of a 3-part episode, kind of. But it's also called That Hope Is You Part 2, which we were discussing at the very beginning of this season, because That Hope Is You Part 1, it says that on Netflix for the first episode of this season, but it doesn't say that on IMDb, so we were thinking, like, what's it called,
Yeah.
Whereas finally now we are getting the Part 2, so Netflix was not wrong.
Yeah.
Part 2 is actually, they've split the
Sorry,
two
Netflix.
parts of that on either side. I don't think it's technically going to be a second part of that episode. Like, no way. Like, it's not going to really be as... But it's sort of continuation through the whole series. Like, maybe it's going to bring everything together,
Yeah, well, again, it's the season finale, so they have to, like, sort of tie everything together in a nice sort of bow, and, it makes sense to have it. We sort of had that, obviously, earlier in the season with Unification 3 being considered, like, the third part to the 2-part Next Generation story. So it sort of prepared us for the whole idea of, like, parts not necessarily being right next to each other,
Yeah, exactly. All right, so last thing I wanted to talk about in this episode was Michael Burnham. There's a few cool moments with her in this. First cool moment is whenever she opened up the chute and like sort of flushed them all out the system. Luckily, she did not get flushed out.
Yeah. It was it's there's a trope that people like to use with a lot of TV, Die Hard on X, where it's like it's the plot of Die Hard but set somewhere else.
Yeah.
And this is definitely Die Hard but in Discovery. Including her being like barefoot and like injured and bleeding and stuff.
Yeah.
There's a lot of homages to Die Hard in it, and that's fair.
Stabbed in the leg, yeah.
Yeah, God. Oh.
That's actually a good way to put it, actually. Die Hard in Discovery. This was like a Die Hard episode for Michael Burnham. That's hilarious.
You'll be able to trace that on a load of different shows where like they'll do like an episode where it's just Die Hard on X,
Yeah. But well, it works. It works.
Yeah.
I thought it worked in this. Also, we had the funny moment where she said to Booker, "Is this the wrong time to tell you I love you for the first time?" which was a great line, and it was hilarious. And then Booker follows it up with, "It's not the first time you talk in your sleep."
Oh, yes, it was very like I do. We talked about it before, but I do like Michael and Buck together. They've got quite a cute relationship. But,
I'm still holding out for Booker to become a member of the Starfleet. I'm still holding out for it.
Again, I think he could easily become like a specialist in the same way that like Michael acts as a specialist, but like an information specialist or an intel specialist. I think there's room for him on the crew. Yeah.
Also, I know that they've mentioned it before, but that courier network, where it's good that they've got that randomly now because they needed to get back to Federation really quickly without any dilithium drive or whatever. So it's good they had that to go through because they didn't have that the rest of the season.
Yeah, well, yes. Luckily, they didn't have to rely on it because they have the spore drive. But at least they sort of they check off gunned the Deus Ex Machina of being able to like go through this, so it didn't feel like a complete cop out. It's like okay, at least they've referenced it beforehand.
They've referenced it before, and at least as well. When you look at what they're doing in it, it makes sense that no one would want to go through that.
Yeah, it's like I can see why this would be a last resort sort of situation.
Because I assume, and I'm pretty sure I'm right. Like the probably doesn't need to be said, but the reason why it looks like that is because when the burn happened, all the ships exploded that were couriering at that time.
Yeah, it's and it's probably a difficult thing to maintain, especially if it's like a black market sort of channel. So like it's difficult for them to sort of keep that stuff going. It's
also really, really long. Like they're talking about like a galaxy here. You know what I mean? All right. Okay. Thanks very much, Emmett. Well, that is us from episode 12, Star Trek. Catch us next week for the season finale. Also, you can catch us covering The Expanse every Saturday. If you haven't watched The Expanse and you're a fan of Star Trek, go and watch it because there needs to be more people watching that show. I'm telling you that now. It's a really, really good show. A bit more realistic than Star Trek, but still, give it a go. Right, Emmett, any final thoughts for the fine people listening?
Drop us comments. Obviously, we've already said hit that like button, etc. We want to
Yep.
get conversations going about people's opinions of this season of Discovery. Obviously keep it civil. But
Yep.
I'm excited for the final part of season 3 and very curious to see where that leaves us in the future Federation.
Yep. Is Doug Jones gonna have his costume back on? I would say
Oh,
yes at the end of the
yes.
episode.
Yes,
Yeah.
100%. You cannot give me a alien captain and then rip it away from me.
That would be crazy.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. Emma, thanks very much. Guys, we'll see you later. See you next week. Bye-bye.